Okay, let's move on to this migration story today. The Albanese government says it's cracking down on temporary migration visas after our annual intake of new migrants hit a record high of 510,000 people this year. That's more than the population of Darwin, Hobart and Cairns combined, I'm told. The new migration strategy will lift English language requirements. It'll make it harder for international students to prove their education status. And they say that the government's going to restrict onshore visa hopping. Joe, what confuses me about this is the Albanese government has clearly had a big Australia policy. They brought in a record number of migrants this year, and now suddenly they're saying they're going to return to normal levels. It feels like the government's policies are chopping and changing. They don't know what they want Australia to look like.
There's a couple of things here. To be fair to Clare O'Neil, who has had a shocker of a month, right from the get-go, she said that she was going to have a look at the migration intake and make sure that it was genuinely skilled workers. And of course, Labor has a dog in this fight because the last thing the unions want, and we've just seen in the last story how influential the unions are still over the Labor Party, is unskilled workers coming in and undercutting the value of Australian labour because that hurts their members. So even if, you can be as cynical as you want, but even if you just look at naked self-interest, there is no reason why the government would want to bring in workers unless they were desperately needed to fill skills shortages and to prevent the economy from hitting kind of bottlenecks or roadblocks. So you've got to make sure that every worker you bring in from overseas is actually creating jobs by unlocking roadblocks in industry that were preventing economic growth, right? And so, it's big business that really wants a big Australia and wants a huge pool of labour market because that devalues the price of labour. So I think the Albanese government has been smart in making this announcement before Christmas because it has huge cost of living significance. And you look at the crackdown on overseas students, for example, which is where most of this looks like it's going to be focused. International students, it is a big export market. I think it's Australia's third biggest export market, selling our education. But of course, they come in, they take up rental accommodation, and we know that that is under huge amounts of pressure.
Yes.
They are often unskilled labourers, so they will take up low-paid jobs and drive down the cost of Australian labour. And of course, it's long been an anecdotal complaint that they bring down the overall standard of education at universities because their English language skills aren't good enough, and so the class ends up sort of going to their level instead of at the level of local students. So I think it's a no-brainer. I think it's a good win for the government and good on them for announcing it.
Well, look, I want to pick up on that theme that you just raised about the housing crisis and the pressure on rent from the high number of immigrants that we've had. The issue is, and we keep talking about on this program, that the high immigration levels are contributing to the high inflation. It's putting pressure on the housing market. Andrew Carswell, the high immigration has technically kept Australia out of a recession, but it has meant as well that inflation has been more difficult to get under control. We heard in recent weeks that the RBA governor has said that inflation is now a homegrown problem. So do you think the government's change of strategy on the migration levels is partly to address this issue of inflation with, the RBA making it clear it's a homegrown problem, the rental crisis isn't helping. Part of the pressure on that is from all the immigrants that come to Australia.
Yeah, I think there can be no mistake that this is an attempt of a political reset. They've had a shocker of 6 months, and this is the populist policy that they're pulling out at the last minute to try and win back some of that support. And there's nothing wrong with the policy that was announced today. I think there's some merit in that. But they're trying to clean up their own mess. And where I have a problem with the policy today is not the policy substance, but the policy rhetoric. They are continuing to blame the previous government for what they see as loopholes and loose processes within within the immigration program. But this is the government that when they came to power, opened the floodgates on our borders. This is the government that let in 500,000 migrants in 1 year, in the same time as there is a cost of living crisis, a housing crisis, and in the same year that they took the scissors to infrastructure projects around the country. So trying to get a grasp of where they're going here is difficult. And I keep coming back to the fact that this is a political fix to try and get themselves out of the doldrums they currently are in. Because the policy, let's face it, the policy is fine and people will love it. People would love a cut to immigration, particularly in the suburbs. And I've always thought that this government lives and dies on how it responds to big Australia and the impacts on cost of living.